Hi everyone. This is just something that I've been sort of percolating on a while and thinking about, and I thought the easiest way to try and get people's views on it and feedback and so on would be just to put together a video about it. It's based on the fact that I don't find all of the ways of classifying people's political views to be very constructive and useful and helpful to our debates. And so, what I thought I'd do was to try to have maybe a slightly more complex and nuanced way of presenting these, which is more accurate, but I'm hoping it's still not too complicated to understand. And so, yeah, I really appreciate any thoughts that anyone has, any feedback, anything can improve and make this better. And if you think it's useful, then do share it and let other people know about it. Oh, by the way, yeah, I'm Doug Bamford. I teach political philosophy. I've kind of been trying to think about the ways that the different views can be linked and opposed to one another. And so, one way of thinking about this is in terms of magnetic poles of attraction and repulsion. That there are these opposite views that repel one another, and so someone is somewhere on a kind of opposing line, a bit like those spectrums, the left-right spectrum and so on, and that you could be maybe in the middle on that line as well in some cases. But that there'll be something pulling you towards a particular pole. And there'll be some other things that you're not too troubled by within your particular position that you've got, and there will be some other things that you'll be very repulsed by and not like at all. And so that's one thing that I'm hoping to capture with the approach that I'm presenting here. And so you can see the oppositions that I'm trying to sort of map out. It's multidimensional, so it's trying to condense things into two dimensions when there's a lot going on. But I'm hoping that that's possible in this kind of way. So on the sort of economy side, you've got the fully state-run economy at one end, and you've got the market economy at the other end. And then you've got that authoritarian versus the decentralized or libertarian. Is the power centralized? Is, someone in charge of everything? So obviously that fits well with the state-run economy. It fits well with the idea of a hierarchical system in general. Whereas the decentralized system fits with this other thing, which is anti-hierarchical. So you've got the hierarchical, I'll give examples shortly, opposing the anti-hierarchical views. And then another one that I put in here is an egalitarian pulse versus an oligarchic attitude. The idea that it's better if there's just a few people in charge, worthy people, whereas the egalitarians are inclined to think no, society should be for everyone in some kind of way, but also everyone should get a say. So the sort of democratic element in that. So there's degrees along these different spectrums, and they oppose one another. So you could just sort of try and work out where you are on all these spectrums, I suppose, and pick yourself out on it. But I want to put in an extra pole as well. My thought is that there's in liberalism, you've got something, it's not just about being in the middle of all of these different things. Liberalism isn't just centrism. Sometimes it can look that way and it can present that way and so on. And it is in some ways in the center of a lot of these things, but it's actually about protecting the individual. As I'll come to say, there's something important about the individual that's key within liberalism that is maybe also very opposed to the views around the edge. So that's, I guess, you've got this magnetic idea that there's certain attractions and repulsions between these things. And so, maybe there's another repulsion from the liberal perspective against the extreme versions of all these things. We can then sort of see how the hierarchical just kind of became the way of doing things, didn't it? So, throughout history, for a long time, there would be these kind of centralized methods and powers, empires, monarchies, different versions of this, feudalism, theocracies, and so on. And so you could say, well, maybe this is quite natural. This is something that people are quite, willing to go along with. Communists would like to say, that's not great. We'd rather have our egalitarian, communist, decentralized alternative and not have the centralized power. But I think that this, for history of civilization, for various reasons, this was pretty much the way things were done. You really got this challenge in England to that, and something that gradually turned into what we'll call classical liberalism. And this came out of sort of, I guess, landowners demanding more power against the king, and then trading class demanding more power against the landowners. And gradually, there was more and more people got brought into this. And there was this emphasis, in some respect, on the individual. And so I think that that was, a challenge that was being presented and led to really successful economic developments and economic growth that was happening around the 16th, 17th, 18th centuries. You would then have this, these three, I guess, for a little while being the options. And I guess the conservatives, in a way, are those who are sort of they're a bit more inclined towards those old ways of doing things. They're maybe trying to go slightly back towards that, but they probably also represent some other people as well. So they're sort of finding themselves a little bit in the middle there between those two. But in Britain, certainly, liberalism became the dominant way of looking at things gradually over time. And these lines, by the way, these are sort of links between them. So, you might get a classical liberal who, conservative view might be closer to their view. And then for a conservative, then they might be considering whether to move towards the classical liberal view or move towards the authoritarian view. So that's what these lines here I've just put in here as a guide to, if you're in any position in this, then what are your options? Where might you change to? You're probably not going to change. So that's basically the way I'm setting things out here. And then you had the development of different views during the 19th century. Lots of different views being developed, and I think that you could consider the more progressive liberal or high liberal kind of alternative, who's less about the market economy and that sort of thing. They're more about making sure everyone can have the means to have a good life and that sort of thing, and potentially more open to intervening in the market, not so keen on laissez-faire for the sake of it. And then there's market socialists, which again I find a bit hard to place even within this, but maybe it's somewhere towards this bottom area. Again, it's got a bit of the market aspect, but it's got an affinity to the communist anarchist position in the sense that the market socialist view, the one that I'm presenting here, is the one where basically workers own and run their own productive organizations. So the factory is run and owned by the workers in this kind of way. So that's what I mean by market socialist. So all of the different workplaces are all worker owned and or worker run or something like that. So that's the idea. So it's anti-hierarchical in that there isn't a boss telling them what to do. There isn't the investors telling them what to do. It's more decentralized in the sense that all of these organizations are working within a market system. And then you've got the idea of a democratic system, which is very appealing during the time to people. People get together, they make all the decisions themselves about how to run things. And so that seems to fit in with the idea of state running the economy. So that, will probably seem fine to a democratic socialist. But what we sort of saw happening in the 20th century was that once you got communist leaders taking over, they essentially just became dictatorships, didn't they? So maybe as a reaction to that, you got the libertarian position. I mean, libertarian was a word to refer to, a type of communist anarchist originally, but then some people took some aspects of that communist anarchism along in this idea of a decentralized system and just really completely went all in on the market economy side and said any intervention with the market is a terrible thing. So this mostly American, I would say, libertarian view here. It's not very common outside of the United States and maybe some South American countries, which says that the market is the key sort of magnetic pole or point of gravity here. We've got to have a market system. We don't want any intervention with the market system for any reason. And my contention is going to be that this is actually very oligarchic, right? Because markets tend towards inequality. If the only thing that's going on is the market, then you've just got an oligarchy of the rich, haven't you? So that I think explains why I think that libertarians have to be fine with oligarchy, because that's the way that's going to run. And authoritarian capitalism maybe isn't that far from libertarianism as well. It's a bit more explicit about the authoritarian, enforcement side of things than the libertarian, which is, much nicer. It's just, oh, it's everyone's choice what they do in the market. But I think that the communist side of things got very much discredited because whenever there were like left wing movements that got success, they would end up putting in place a temporary communist dictatorship, which then just became basically a dictatorship. And so, yeah, these aren't necessarily in the right order anymore, but there's also social democracy in here, and this was quite prominent in the sort of the 1960s, the post-war era. The idea that the state would run some parts of the economy, so it's a bit towards the state run. It doesn't necessarily run everything. It's a bit more sort of pluralist in the sense that there's lots of sources of power like trade unions and business owners and things like that. So it's not just, the state runs everything or anything like that. But maybe the idea is eventually you get towards democratic socialism. Gradually, the state will take over everything. Whether that would then, count as a dictatorship, I think the idea would be that it would be democratic. What I wanted to sort of emphasize here is that there's a bit of a sort of an affinity as well between these extremes, the communist dictatorship and the authoritarian, religious fundamentalist, whatever it is, they might actually look pretty similar in practice in a lot of cases. They'll use different terms about what they're doing and what they value and that sort of thing, but their way of organizing things will be quite similar in that it will be highly centralized and very authoritarian. So I think this is where that horseshoe kind of theory comes in a little bit. It's presented here, and I've got this idea of clover, like four-leaf clover. I was thinking about some kind of flower or something like that, where these things kind of loop up, they loop together. So it's kind of like a bit of like an X. So I called it the X loop. That was one idea I came up with to name it. So yeah, any ideas for the naming, get in touch with me. And I was just thinking that, you can sort of see this thing in the middle where there's the left and right, and then they branch off in different directions. But then those different directions on the sort of X, they actually loop round to one another. So that's basically my thinking of how I've pictured this. It's like an X where the corners of the X loop round to join each other, a bit like a sort of, well, it turns out that four-leaf clovers don't look exactly like I thought they did. But anyway, that was the kind of thing I was thinking about. And as I hinted at earlier, I think that then the liberal is very suspicious about all these things around the edge because the liberal wants to kind of protect the individual from the state being too powerful and overpowering the individual, or the market overpowering the individual. Maybe not so much the classical liberal on that one. It's this kind of left-right thing within the liberal sort of position. This is, maybe more about what they're more fearful of in terms of the extremes, but they share this core concern about the individual being locked to, the communist collective. You've got to do whatever the people in your commune tell you to do, right? You don't have any freedom in that kind of liberal sense. You just got to go along with the majority all the time. And that's what liberal is concerned, to make sure that there's the opportunity for people to organize their lives according to their own views and values and preferences and so on. So liberals are going to be very suspicious of all of these views on the outside. And so it's kind of like its own pole in a way, but it's going to have to have a little bit something along these different dimensions here. And so I call it pluralism because it's about having lots of checks and balances, lots of power points within society. You don't centralize power with the king or the Communist Party or, the rich people in the market or, have everything decided by a democratic vote. You set things up in a way where there isn't one center of power. And that's the way that you sort of make sure that the individual isn't overpowered by something. But yeah, so I would just find it interesting as well. When we've got this left and right spectrum, it's often gone bit like this. I think that what a lot of people who are attracted to left-wing views, what they're attracted to is this kind of view down here. This is the kind of the nice, lovely communism where everyone gets to say over everything and it's all democratic and friendly and lovely. But then in reality, this just has never been able to exist effectively, this kind of considered utopian version of communism, according to some, just not stable. It's going to break down. Maybe it's hard to instantiate that for more than a small number of people, and so you're going to need something a bit more organized, and then you're going to just end up with a small group of Communist Party officials running everything in reality. So the kind of the left right kind of position has tended to be like that. And you could say, well, it should be, from the top right to the top left, or it could be from the top left to the bottom left, as libertarians might want to say. But I think probably where people are talking left and right, that's kind of what they're talking about, really. But yeah, thoughts are welcome on all these things. So pause it, have a think. Where do different politicians, where do different political parties sit within this spectrum here? And so, yeah, I'd love to get feedback on this. Did you find this helpful? Is it a too complicated way of looking at things? Is there a way I can make it easier to understand? Did you like any of those analogies that I came up with? That it's about magnetic poles. Can you think of a better analogy for how this can be understood and presented? And yeah, did you think that any of those kind of oppositions that I was setting out, in those far poles, those extremes, were any of them a bit useless or, should be replaced with something else that would better capture the different views that people have? And then, is there a better way for me to explain what I'm doing here? Any suggestions about how to do that? I thought just putting this in a video would probably be the easiest way. Yes, all thoughts very welcome. I think that we really need to have better democratic debates in our society. I think things have become very childish, very low quality debates, just name calling, people not understanding one another, people misattributing views to one another and not listening to each other. And so, anything I can do to try and help to make sense of what's going on and help other people to make sense of each other, I'm hoping will be a good thing. So, yep, whatever you want to call it, this X loop or the flower or the leaf or the magnetic political placement. Tell me what name to use. Tell your friends about it. Let's come up with something better if possible. That's what I'm hoping to achieve. So, yeah, thanks very much.